Okay, we're going to talk about really one of my most favorite topics. It really, really is. So if I'm acting like a Baptist preacher and jumping up a little bit or getting really animated, it's because this is just a great topic. I love talking about it. And my hope is once I'm done talking about it, it will be something that you put on your radar, and it's something that you will use to help you in your journey as far as trying to find your family. Okay, let's see if we can get this working here. Okay, so in my belief, African American newspapers hold the key to genealogical research success. I am 150% in on that. I'm all in. It is truly, through my experience and the experiences of others that I've helped along the way, it is truly a key. Okay. To look at why, or to convince you as to why this statement is true, one of the reasons is because those papers represent one of the few sources where the daily activities of black communities, both large and small, are documented. And I don't know how many times you guys are running around trying to find your ancestors in these little teeny tiny towns and you can't find anything on them because they really haven't done much of anything. Well, you're going to be doing a happy dance before this is over with because they're in those newspapers everywhere for the most part. Okay, and these communities are just wonderful. They're full of former slaves waiting to be discovered, USCT soldiers, and that's the acronym for United States Colored Troop, Civil War soldiers are in there, and they're very, very important, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. And just scores of ordinary folks. Now, I don't know about your folks, but most of mine were ordinary. Okay, they didn't end up in a history book next to Martin Luther King or Frederick Douglass or whatever. They were normal people in small and large places, and they were ordinary people that, surprisingly, in lots of cases, my people included, they did extraordinary things though. But it got captured in those black newspapers, not in the mainstream newspapers. This is a Family Tree magazine. I've been subscribing to this thing, I can't remember how long. I love it. It's a great resource. And they have a Family Tree University, and they approached me a couple years ago and asked me to write a course for them on African American newspapers, or finding African Americans in newspapers. So it was mainstream newspapers and black newspapers. And so I took on that challenge, I did that for them. Then they came back about a year later and asked me if I'd write an article, pretty much a companion article to that course. And I agreed to do that. And so I wrote this article on black newspapers, and it just worked perfectly for my talk. And so I was so glad that I was able to insert it into this talk, because this talk is like about 3 or 4 years old. So I was able to incorporate it here. And it's just a great segue, because what I wrote about, and I had a hard time paring it down, but we're going to look at 11 benefits of efficient or of black newspaper use that I talked about in the article. The first one is pre-Civil War status, okay? And for African Americans, that is very, very important. But what we tend to do is we tend to jump the gun. What we tend to do is we have been told that the Civil War freed the slaves, which is true, Emancipation Proclamation, Civil War, that time period, 1860s. Most slaves in pretty much everybody was free at that point. And the first time you're going to find them is on the 1870 census, okay? But what my good friend Tony Burrows tells people all the time is when they come up to him and they're telling him, they say, well, my ancestors were slaves, whatever. And he says, how do you know that? Have you looked for them on the 1860 census? And they look at him like he's crazy, like he doesn't know his history. And what Tony is trying to tell them is that you have to look on the 1860 census to see if they're there, because they may have been free prior to the Civil War. And so that's what he was trying to tell them. So you need to find out what your ancestors' pre-Civil War status is before you start going in trying to find in deeds and all that kind of stuff. You know if they were slaves or not. And that's what black newspapers can do for you. They can give you those leads, they can make those mentions in those papers about your ancestors that will tell you that they're a former slave. Hello, then you know, okay? But this is one way to validate that. Pre-vital records, and we're going to share a lot of pain in here over the next 50 minutes or so, because it's painful trying to find, you know, birth records in particular. We tend to think, and lots of people, especially new researchers, tend to think that what they see in 2010, 2012 is what was taking place 150 years ago as far as registrations and births and that type of thing. And, you know, lots of different states like Illinois, you know, I think it was 1916 might be the date where the state actually started keeping those records. You know, before that, some of the counties did for maybe 40, 50 years, could have been spotty. You had midwives, you had lots of issues in there and no firm reporting requirements. And so black newspapers really are a nice place to find those birth announcements, those mentions of a birth or death or that type of thing that you may not find in other locations. Okay. Military service connections. How many in here have a military ancestor? Okay. How many of them had a pension? Happen to have a pension? Okay, you guys I know are probably smiling because, right? I mean, it's great. Rarely does somebody find a military pension, especially USCT pension, that's not full of great stuff. Okay, it is just a terrific source, and so it is so important, and it can open up so many doors, like identifying a slaveholder, that you want to try to make a military service connection. And in those newspapers, that's very possible. You'll find former soldiers going to one of my favorite, I give a talk on Grand Army of the Republic, or GAR. And African Americans, lots of them were members of the GAR. And so they would travel to these annual conventions and things like that. They were members of local posts and stuff like that. And so if you find them attending these things, then you've got a military connection. Now you need to start looking for, you know, a pension or whatever. And if you can't find it, at least you know to keep looking because you've got some validation that they were in the service. This is my favorite. I gotta admit, they shouldn't be playing favorites, but I'm playing favorites right now. A window to the community. You can just spend hours, that's some of you when you read newspapers, if you do this, you can just spend hours just reading this stuff because it's just so amazing, the different things. You can just go through these things over and over again. Before you know it, you went there to do one thing and all of a sudden 4 hours later you're still just reading the newspapers because they're so fascinating. But they open up a window to that community. They tell you what's going on within that community. Not only your ancestor, but your ancestor was part of a community of others that interacted with them for good, bad, or whatever. And so they have connections. We have this term we use called collateral lines, where you talk about these other people. When your line gets stopped, you can't get any further down. You have to go lateral. You have to go sideways and try to pick up other people. And these are the people you're going to find out about who your ancestors hung out with through this window to the community. And usually that window is accessible through something we call social columns, or I like to call them community columns too, but the standard term is social columns. And if you haven't seen any social columns or aren't familiar, fasten your seatbelt. I mean, they're absolutely terrific. Pictures. And I don't know if you're like me, but my family didn't leave a lot of pictures, and some of the ones they did, we don't know who they are. And so I was amazed at the number of pictures that you find in black newspapers. They're absolutely wonderful. I mean, not just individual pictures at times. You find Gary, Indiana, 1940s, I think, or whatever. I found, I think it was in the Chicago Defender. It was like an anniversary or whatever. And so they showed, like, I want to say it was the pastor's anniversary committee or whatever. It's probably about 20 some people. And it was just absolutely wonderful. It had all their names right there. And that was just a terrific, terrific picture. But there's tons of things out there and they're wonderful. Church affiliations. Next month I'm going to be traveling down to Birmingham. I'm going to be speaking at something called IGHR, which is the Institute for Genealogy and Historical Research. There's an African American track that I'm going to be speaking in. And this year, one of the lectures I'm going to be delivering is going to be on churches, African American churches, or finding your African American during the Reconstruction era period. So looking at different records that you can then use to link your ancestor in that vital period of Reconstruction right after Civil War. And knowing that church affiliation is very important, okay, because it then is a springboard to other records. And so black newspapers are really a great source for finding out if they're AME or Baptist, or as one of my friends, I had to throw in there, Catholic, because her family's Catholic. Not a whole lot of them, but still, you got to find out who it is. Then that points you to what records you want to look for. Okay, Pullman Porter identification. I've got one of those, and I was really, really excited when I knew it beforehand, but it's almost like, it's almost like getting a nice little award or whatever when you can find that you got a Pullman Porter, because that's kind of a status symbol, amongst researchers, just like finding the Civil War soldier or whatever. If you can find an ancestor that was a Pullman Porter, and you can identify him, then start tracking those records up into Chicago and whatever, where some of those archives are, it's just terrific. And the papers are just absolutely full of Pullman Porter accounts. And one of the unique things, and if you think, well, I don't know if mine were Pullman Porter or not, don't discount the fact that they may be a Pullman Porter. Because what I find in those newspapers, and it's just amazing, is that you would think that, if they're a Pullman Porter, they would be there for life. Well, not necessarily. Through those papers, I see time and time again somebody leaving the Pullman Porter to start their own business or to do this or to do that or whatever. And so they're coming in, they might be here for 3, 4, 5 years, okay? So they're in the records, but then they left. So if it wasn't on a census when you found them, 1900, 1910, 1920, whatever, you might think they weren't. But they could have been from 1914 to 1918 or 19, whatever, and the newspaper will find them for you. Entrepreneurial ancestors. Again, that's something that really surprised me, I think, is the fact that how many African Americans were striking out on their own and doing all kinds of things, all manner of things. Like I say, you tend to think, like me, I was thinking big, like, some big company with, thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars or whatever, and a whole bunch of employees. No, just small businesses from shoe repair shops, bicycle shops. One of my favorites is lots of people hang out their shingle and they give like piano lessons, music lessons, that kind of thing. And so you're going to find your ancestors hanging out the shingle and announcing it in the black newspapers. Okay, this is another big thing of mine. I love trying to find migration clues beyond the Great Migration. Everybody knows about the Great Migration. Lots of people know about the Kansas Exodus, and they kind of get these narrow topics. But your people could have moved, and people did move. 1890 to 1900, thousands of African Americans were moving all over the place. In 1900, 1910, Great Migration, again, tons of African Americans were moving, and these newspapers give you great clues as to where they were going. Okay. Out-of-state county marriages. Again, one thing that I know most of you, if you've been researching for a while, this one has driven you crazy because you're like, I know where they were. I found, through oral history, or they were in this particular county. I know that's where they were. And I'm looking through, and I just cannot find them in those county courthouse records. I cannot find that marriage certificate. Something's not right. And what's not right is that they went somewhere else. And you just don't know where they went. Okay, and I found, again, just so many different examples of somebody, a couple that was from Norfolk, Virginia, and they had moved up to Olean, New York. So you think they got married. If I'm looking for them in one of those two places. They got married in Philadelphia. And it was in the Philadelphia Tribune, okay, in a column that was talking about Norfolk, Virginia. See? So there's all kinds of ways, but that's how you solve. Logically, you're not going to solve it a lot of times, but with newspapers and the trends in technology, now you can solve a lot of these puzzles. In African American viewpoints, again, in the mainstream papers, you got the mainstream take on things. And you didn't hear about, what we thought or what we were doing as far as our view toward the election, either whether it was national or local or different things. And these papers are great to find that kind of a thing, And even when we talk about viewpoints, one of my favorites it's in the Norfolk Journal and Guide, and I've seen it in a couple other newspapers too. It's like the man on the street thing, where they'll go out there and they'll ask a question about something. And you just got average people that they're just walking up to and saying, what do you think about this, one of them was they were asking about this park. I guess they were given some kind of a black group was coming in there and doing some kind of a musical thing or whatever in the park. And they were asking them, what do you think about that event or whatever? And you've got some diverse opinions too, but it was really neat because they listed who it was. Sometimes they listed what address they were at and that kind of thing. And so, again, your people are all through these newspapers. Okay, so trying to get you warmed up and saying you want to find these newspapers or you want to use these newspapers, well, I guess I better tell you how to find them. it's not all that difficult. This is a great site. Chronicling America, Historic African American Newspapers. How many people have actually been there? Oh boy, I might have to double my request for pay here by the time I get done. You guys, I'm giving you guys a lot of information. This is situated at the Library of Congress website, okay, hosted there at the Library of Congress. And this is the recommended way of going there. Once you get there and find it, you can bookmark it or whatever, and then you've got it. But it's really hard to find if you go to the Library of Congress website. Very, very busy site, very, very hard to find this. So just go to a search engine, Google or whatever, and just key in Chronicling America, and it'll take you right to it. It'll give you a link that you can click on. Okay, this is what it looks like. This is the main page. And I did a lot of work updating this talk because, of course, when you're on the internet, right, things change all the time, you know, constantly changing out there. And so Chronicling America got a facelift about 8 months ago or so. And so it was totally different. So I had to change most of my slides. Still got 2 old slides. You want to know what it looked like before, you got to get a chance to see it. But I had to go and update my slides to give you the current view. So what you'll be seeing when you go out there. But this is what it looks like today. There's a couple of places. There, what's pointing at now is the digitized newspaper section. This is where they've went in, they've got grant money, and they're paying these states and these different universities or institutions to digitize papers, okay? And they're getting money to do that, and they're doing it for a certain time period. And I believe now it goes like up to maybe about 1922 is the window. So if you've got papers, you put in a proposal, and then they upload or they digitize those papers. And so you can actually go out there. There's probably, I want to say, last time I looked, I don't think there were quite 12. So I think maybe between 6 and 12 African American newspapers are actually out there now. There's maybe only about, I want to say maybe a dozen or more states that, not many, dozen and a half states that actually are represented in the digitized papers. Like Maryland I know is, Washington D.C. is. And so those two, if you know anything about African American newspapers, there was the Baltimore Afro-American. And so there were several really good newspapers that ended up getting digitized. And so you can go out there and actually look and browse and look at those newspapers. But the more important one, the one we're going to talk about as far as finding newspapers, is here, okay? And here what we're looking at is the U.S. newspapers collection as far as searching for them, okay? The catalog. So if you click on that, this is the page it's going to bring you to. And so you've got several options. I'm going to got a pointer on here. Let's see. Oh yeah, we do. Okay, and so you've got several options in here, like where it was published. So you can search by state, you can search by a time frame, you can narrow that down. We're going to kind of cover that a little bit. You can also put in keywords if you've got a keyword as far as a newspaper that you know about to bring it up to the surface. But the biggest, most important thing is down here toward the bottom, and it says ethnic press. Okay, that's the key right there, is ethnic press. You click on that, you get a pop-up drop box, and with many options, and you just choose African American. And now it's only going to search for African American papers that have been designated as African American newspapers within the collection. So with that, we can answer that question down there, how many black newspapers have been found and cataloged by Chronicling America project. You click search, there's your answer right there. And I was quite surprised. The number's been going up. I've been doing this, like I've been doing it for several years. And so I'll go out there and do a new search to get an updated number. This is the updated number from probably a couple months ago. So over 2,000 black newspapers have been found and cataloged, okay? And that's just great news. Now, most of those, and again, we're going to be talking about this, most of those are not digitized. You're not going to find them by going out to the internet. So if all you do is internet search, you're going to be disappointed when it comes to newspaper search, because lots of it is not that way. It is on microfilm, okay? But again, for every negative, there's a positive, and the positive is that you can interlibrary loan almost everything and get it here. Some university will you just loan it, and they'll send it from the university or whatever to the library. And if you have some wrinkles there, we can talk about that. That's kind of a tricky thing, but I've gotten around that, and we can discuss that. Okay. Now, what I like to do, this particular one, what I did is up at the top, you see I put all states. So I left it at all states, but then I went and I narrowed the time frame. Before it went all the way up to probably 2012 or whatever. But this is what I've learned, is that in history, in the 1950s, when the African Americans were really pressing for civil rights, okay, so all of that going on, looking for a voice, all of that caused, especially in the 60s, an explosion of black newspapers, Muslim newspapers, black power newspapers, underground stuff, whatever. Tons of that stuff came out. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but my point is, when I'm trying to research early African American stuff, you know, that 2,000 some number, a lot of it, as you can see here, was almost nearly half of it was all of that. So here you get a better feel or fit for those early African American newspapers, you know, around late 1800s, well, 1880 to about 1950. You get a really good feel for what's out there. And still, it's good news, over 1,000 have been found and cataloged within that time frame. Okay. Next slide, neighbor Indiana. Just give you an idea, that same time frame, 16 black newspapers have been found and cataloged there. Amongst them are the Indianapolis Freeman, which is an absolutely fantastic paper with a long run. The Indianapolis Recorder, another great paper. And lots of people from Michigan went south of the border or came up north initially, and they're going back and forth, visiting in South Bend and all these other places. And those Indianapolis Recorder is a great newspaper to do that research in. Ohio, again, another state where I assume there's lots of migration back and forth. 46 papers been found and cataloged. The Cleveland Gazette's among them. I love that paper. It's an absolutely good, nice paper, great resource. The Call and Post is out there and available. And so there's some really good ones that have a lot of connections to Michigan. And then here's Michigan. At the same time frame, you got 18 black newspapers found and cataloged. One of my favorites during this time period is the Plain Dealer. And it didn't have a long run here, but I'm thankful for the several years that are extant meaning that exist. And it's just a great collection, and they cover so many different places that you wouldn't think outside of Michigan. In that Plain Dealer, it's a super paper, and now that it's digitized, it is digitized, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Now that it's digitized, it makes searching it so easy. And I find places in Illinois, connections that I didn't even think would be in the Plain Dealer. It's a super paper. What makes it even more outstanding, right, is the fact that the time frame it covers, about 1889 or so, I think, is when the extant copies start, up to maybe 92 or 93 or somewhere in there. We're talking what? The 1890 census that got destroyed? So you can fix those people now through the newspaper at a point in time that you couldn't get from the census because it was destroyed. Okay, so again, as much as we like to lean on the internet, you've got to go out and you've got to balance yourself, and you've got to look at other resources that are available. Okay, and so we're going to talk about printed finding aids because everything is not on the internet. I don't care what people tell you, don't drink that Kool-Aid, okay? Don't believe what they're telling you about that because it's not true. You've got to go out and look at other sources. And here's what I call the big three. We're going to take each one of these quickly. Okay. This one is actually here at the library. Beth put it over there on the table there. I was a little bit surprised to see it there because it's not something that your average library will purchase, which is kind of a testament to the library here. It's a great collection. It's just a great book. I bought my own personal copy, but then I'm a newspaper junkie, so what would you expect? But here, it's a union list, and basically what I'm trying to tell you with a union list basically is that it's a compilation of many libraries that he went or institutions, archives, whatever, that he got this information from. So it's a culmination of all that information, not just from one little source. So it's spread out. Very, very comprehensive. It took 10 years for them to do it. They sent people out to different repositories. They sent letters out. Then they sent people out to verify things that were there. They wanted to make sure this thing was accurate. And so everything that you see there on this union list, if you find a newspaper in there, it exists somewhere. Okay? It is in existence somewhere. And they found over 6,500 entries. And now you notice from this, though, it's newspapers and periodicals. So Jet magazine's in there, Ebony's in there, Ollie Essence magazine is in there. So newspapers and periodicals, but it's a ton of newspapers in this bibliography. This is just a sample page from a newspaper that I use quite a bit. I had relatives that went to Iowa from Illinois. It's the Iowa Bystander. And so this is a standard entry for you to look at. Gives you a number up here. It looks like 3219. And basically, again, it just goes right from 1 in the book, 1 to 6,532 or whatever the numbers were. It just goes straight through. Okay? And so this is the entry there. And it gives you a lot of basic information about the publisher and some good information. But the point I was trying to drive home earlier about you just can't rely on the internet is in here somewhere. You can probably see it, but somewhere in there, I can't totally identify exactly where it is from here, from my vantage point here. But, question here.
On this, is there an index on the initials that they're using? Like that?
Yes. You have to go to the book, and the book is right here. So you can just go to the book and look and see. Yeah, because like I say, usually when they're compiling such big things, they got to use some kind of codes or something. But then they'll give you, the index to that. But you mentioned the word index, which is what I was trying to get at, and here it is right here. This is something I didn't know. Until I got to Danke's book, I've been doing a lot of research in the Bystander. Most newspapers are not indexed. There's not an index that's been created for them. So you got to go through, and if you found a date that, a birth date or a death date or a marriage date, then you can go in there for a certain time frame and try to find it. But trying to find general information out, you don't know where you're going to find it on your people because it's not indexed. But this one was indexed, and I've been going back and forth to Des Moines, Iowa, and going to the state archives there, and the index was at the Des Moines Public Library. At some point, they decided they were going to index it, and they indexed it, and it was only right there. And so I was walking past it left and right, spending all my hours in the other place. I didn't know. And so again, the advantage of using multiple sources pays off. Down below here is kind of what we're referring to. This is the listing, and it might have went on to a second page, but this is a listing of the places where Danke and his group went, and they said, yes, we have a copy of it. The Wisconsin Historical Society, Howard University, I recognize some of these, the Des Moines Public Library, etc. And again, you can get the codes in the book and tell you exactly where they are. Also, what you can do, thankfully, and I said they were smart when they put this together, what they have in the back is a geographic index. Because again, remember it's numbered 1 to 6,000 something. So how do you know which one is the paper that you're looking for? Well, they have a geographic index in the back. So all you got to do now is just go through, it's organized by state and city within the state. So you just go through there, and it gives you those numbers, and then you just go to the number entry and find it. Okay. The Bibliographic Checklist of African American Newspapers by Barbara Henritzey. This started as an article for a society newsletter. And it was almost the book that never was, or never was to be. Because she just wrote an article. She was being hounded by the president, I believe at the time, of the African American Society in Cleveland. And this was a white lady. And she was being hounded to, because she was interested, was doing some stuff on this area. She said, you got to write an article, you got to, for our newsletter or whatever. So she started doing it. And then she got the bug, she got hooked. And so she just kept on researching, wrote the article and said, hey, I've only scratched the surface, so she kept going. And 5,539 entries later, from over 100 sources, she was finally done. Quite a track race for her, but that was great. Now this is a checklist, and there's a difference between the checklist and the book we looked at earlier, which was a union list. And it's a very important distinction, because what Barbara did is she searched high and low for every black newspaper reference to a black newspaper that she could find. So if she was looking at another newspaper and it said something about this newspaper called the Black Patriot in Boston or whatever, and they made reference to something from that paper, then that's an entry in that book, the Black Patriot, blah, blah, blah. And then she'll say where she found that entry or whatever. But does that paper exist or not today? Is it extant? You don't know. You don't necessarily know. So you see the difference there. There'll be entries in here of newspapers that may not have any copies out there, none that have been found, okay? And then that'll be mixed in with things that are. And you can tell by the book when you read the instructions, it'll tell you, and you can tell which ones are extant. There'll be little clues there that'll tell you, like OCLC, for example. I don't know if anybody know what I'm talking about, I'll say OCLC. But if they're saying OCLC, that means it's in an online library catalog. And if it's in an online library catalog, it's there, okay? And so there'll be little clues. This is what this looks like. This is just a page from Indiana. And her book is straight in alphabetical order by state, and then within state by city, okay, her entries. This is a book, I know you cannot even see that title, and it's the one book that's not over there. I have a copy of it. Again, I own all three of those books I'm talking about. This is called The Extant Collections of Early Black Newspapers, a Research Guide to the Black Press, 1880 to 1915. And it's with an index to the Boston Guardian from 1902 to 1904. And it's by Georgetta Merritt Campbell. But again, I have this book here afterwards. You can look at it and write down the title. But this is a book that I love too. It started out as a master's thesis, and she was so wrapped up in it, she decided to keep going with it. She knew it was something that needed to be put out there, and so she kept working on it. She tried to tackle indexing. She wanted to index a lot more than 1902 to 1904, but you try indexing something, especially a newspaper. So she got 2 years in, and that's very, very laudable. So she's got a partial index to the Boston Guardian. In this book, she talked a lot about when she was going through those newspapers, she just could not believe when she saw those social columns and how valuable the information was in those social columns. And so she just had a special part in her book where she just talked about that. Okay, this is what it looks like. I believe this book is at Western. Okay, this book it's probably at Western, or we believe it's at Western Michigan University. Like I say, it won't be very hard. They say usually this one is not as easy to find. So if it's at Western and you're interested in it, that's great, because there's not quite as many copies of this around in existence as the prior two. But then again, this is just another example of the bystander here, or the entry for the bystander. And again, just like the other, it's got codes and whatever. It tells you the time frame that these different institutions, or this particular one anyway, has of the bystander. And again, what's unique, when I took the entry from Danke's book, compared it to Merritt Campbell's book, I found extant or existing copies that she had found that he had not found. Could have been letters that went out, that he sent out that went unanswered, or whatever. But that's why I say, you got to do, when you research, you have to be thorough. Okay. And now here's an example of an OCLC search, which is basically an online computer search, like WorldCat, if you're familiar with WorldCat. And it's just a search, and many thousands of libraries have uploaded their information to WorldCat or OCLC. And this is just an example of when I did a search probably about a year or so ago, and just to see you can get this thing very easily. Number of libraries holding that first book by Danke, 601, found it in 48 states in the District of Columbia. The checklist, 427, found in 42 states that said they held it, institutions that said they held it, and the District of Columbia. And then the third book by Merritt Campbell, 278 of them are known to exist in libraries and other establishments, including Western Michigan, and 44 different states, District of Columbia, and also I was the University of Alaska at Anchorage. I'm like, what is it doing up there? I'm thinking, okay, maybe Merritt Campbell had an ancestor or somebody that migrated that way or something, and so they wanted it or needed it from the Boston area. Who knows? But I found that kind of interesting. Okay, but again, the point I've been driving home is that the greater results will be achieved when all of the finding aids are used together, because each one has their strengths and weaknesses. Okay, now we're going to look at some tips and strategies for uncovering social columns, because again, that is really the big focus of being successful when you do African American newspaper research. Okay, and this is something that Luther Jackson was a well-established, well-known black historian from the 60s time frame, 60s, 70s, and he wrote the foreword to Campbell's book. And it was so profound to me, so meaningful that I wanted to share it here. And he says, but the black press contains a number of essentials valuable to the historians and genealogists, our locals, that consist of short paragraphs of social news, as well as the comings and goings of business and professional people and their families. Equally valuable are the columns that record similar doings among out-of-towners. And of course, he's referring to out-of-towners, those social columns in a newspaper in Chicago, for example, where the social columns are coming in from Mississippi and Iowa and Ohio and all over the place, those out-of-town doings that are being sent into a paper that's hundreds of miles away. Okay, and so social columns, in effect, what they are, they're extensions of these local news columns. You always tend to find in the format the local news in a local newspaper. Well, they're just extensions. They're more than just the local news. You get the out-of-town news also at a local level in these out-of-town communities. It allows us, which is just terrific, it allows us to reach into other communities beyond the town where the newspaper is being published. And that is so important. That is the gift that we're getting here, is that it's going out of those communities where that newspaper is, out of Chicago to Wyoming and other places, and reaching into those communities and showing you what they were doing there in 1910, 1918, or whatever. Okay, and again, your normal mindset is to look in Wyoming for what's going on, you know, there in Cheyenne, but there's nothing there in most cases that's African American in nature as far as news that has been published in the newspapers there. Now, to find these newspapers, the smart strategy is to search your geographical area first, okay, and see if there's something there. You know, if they're in Wyoming, see if check the Cheyenne paper, see if there's a black newspaper there. If not, then move on to the majors, like the Chicago Defender and the Pittsburgh Courier, two major papers that had national reach. I would say between those two papers, both of them, they probably carried, you know, news of 80 to 90% of the states were represented with towns in those newspapers. Once you find a column for the community you're researching, don't stop. Don't stop, okay? More than one paper may be reporting news on that town. So once you find it in the Defender or whatever, look in the Courier. Look in the Courier too. Because you're gonna learn from newspapers that sometimes, even though, like I say, there's copies that survived and there's copies that didn't survive. There's copies that are mutilated to some degree. So of course your people are always going to be in the most difficult place, right? You're looking for them and they were on the edge, they got mutilated. That's, you can tell, oh, that's the town right there. And the date, oh God, that was an important date too. That's around the time the great-great-grandfather or whatever did whatever he did. Well, you go to the Courier, that reporter may have sent news, he might have worked for both the Defender and the Courier. And so you may find a copy of that in that newspaper, okay? And so that's just one of the things that don't stop. Keep looking, you want to find as many places. Another thing, again, little tricks, again, when you've been doing this for years, what you see, I've seen where a guy wrote for two columns, or sent them to two different places. You know what happens? They've only got so much space. And so on one, I got the column, I thought I had it, but I learned, so I went and tried to find it somewhere else. I did. There was another 2 paragraphs in the other newspaper because they had to cut it in the other one to make it fit. They clipped it. They clipped the bottom. And then the other one, they had enough space and they included the other 2 columns. And you know your people are going to be in the last 2 columns, don't you? That's the way it happens for us. Okay, and so discovery of multiple columns will then allow for coverage when missing issues occur. Again, because you just don't know when there's going to be issue, you're going to be going through that microfilm reel and it says, you know, next 2 issues or next 3 issues missing. They're just missing. Who knows where they are? Who knows if you ever find them? And so if you find multiple columns, then there's chances that if it's missing in one, you may find it in another newspaper, okay? And this is my favorite. There is no town too small to warrant a social column. None. All it took was somebody that was literate, that took it on and decided they were going to write. I mean, the places where I found my people, tiny little towns, that people would not, even people within 50 miles of that place probably don't remember what the town was. But they're there. They're in these columns, and I just could not believe when I found them there in the Chicago Defender, of all places. And all it took was somebody to send in the news, and they published it. Okay. These out-of-town columns are often the result of sizable migrations of former residents. So a lot of times you're going to find a strange one, like Pueblo, Colorado, you know, Pueblo, and you're just going to see week after week after week, they're sending in columns. One of my favorites, my great-grandfather, my father's side, migrated to a little tiny coal mining town, Thurber, Texas, okay? Nothing there now, okay? Nothing there now. And he moved there, and it was a coal mining community. They recruited lots of African Americans from about 4 or 5 different places. One of them was Leavenworth, Kansas. I talk about this in my book. Leavenworth, Kansas. Well, sure enough, out of the few places I found a Thurber column was in the Leavenworth Herald News from the 1890s when they migrated. And so I got a window into Thurber through the Leavenworth, Kansas newspaper. Okay, now what would have made me look at the Leavenworth, Kansas newspaper normally? Nothing. But when I started researching that community and I found out where the African Americans were coming into there from, I started going back out and looking at the places for African American newspapers, and I was rewarded. Okay, and I did a hard search for that. It wasn't digitized at that time. I just went through for the time period I knew that they were there, they meaning that the Thurber migration was taking place, found a Thurber column, found about 20 of them or so. Boy, I mean, it was great. It was worth the effort. And then the appearance of social columns frequently defy logic. So you must examine all black newspapers you have access to. Because all black newspapers are going to have something about some of your ancestors. You know, just look at them all. Because you just don't know. Just like the example I gave you, the logic may not be there. You may not understand it. We may not ever know why they put the column there. But the fact is, when you find it, you don't care why, do you? For the most part, you're just glad you found it. Okay, so let's go back real quick to Chronicling America for an illustration of what we've been talking about here. Okay, so this is the state of Illinois. I did a search, Chronicling America. There were 154 black newspapers found in catalog for Illinois. Okay, and I was working on a project for a specific place. And that place was Champaign, Illinois, or Champaign-Urbana, the home of the University of Illinois Fighting Illini. And so I was doing research. And so I found, Chronicling America, 9 black newspapers there in catalog. But none were from the time period where I was looking for this family. It was the early 1900s, and they weren't, none of the newspapers. So I'm drawing a blank here. They're pitching a shutout on me. And then, of course, again, being a good researcher, I went to the big 3. I didn't find any relevant entries there either. And it's not that African Americans were not in Champaign, okay? Here's the example. They were there. 1900, over 400 were there. 1910, grew by about 300 or so, 350. 1910 to 1920, the Great Migration began. And you can look, and you can make a theory that they got a pretty good number of people from the South into Champaign when you look at the leap of about 500 some versus that 300 or so the decade prior to that. And then you can look at it slow down again back to normal when you got 1,200 to 1,500, another 300 or so roughly. So you can kind of see that uptick. If you didn't know anything about the Great Migration, you know, but that would have been what it was. You can kind of see it there. But tons of African Americans there. And so it's like they are there, but they're not being reported on I can't find them. Because they didn't have their own paper, at least none that existed. And boom, I found. What did I find? How did I find? Social columns. That's when I used the strategy I was just showing you. I found social columns talking all about Champaign, Illinois. Okay, this backdrop you see here pretty much is Prairie State News. That's how the Chicago Defender classified. Every week they'd have a huge, sometimes 80, 90 to 100 social columns in one Defender. Okay, and about 30 or so of them, 35, 40 of them, may be from Illinois. They call it Prairie State News, all on one page, sometimes 2 pages. And Champaign, sure enough, was sitting right in there. This one I put up here, this one I put up here is from the Chicago Whip, which is a different newspaper from 1921. But now here's a summary of what I was able to find. And again, this is just what I found. I could have kept looking and added to this. But I found Champaign columns. I was able to find the people I was looking for and get into that community through social columns, through the Chicago Defender, the Chicago Whip, the State Capitol, the Illinois Record, and the Freeman, which was an Indiana paper. So through all of those papers, I was able to tap into there and find out tons of information about that community. Okay. Now we're going to talk about something called ProQuest. ProQuest is an online database. It's absolutely terrific, but it's absolutely expensive. It is very expensive. It comes free, sometimes up to twice a year for like a week or so. What they'll do is Black History Month. Sometimes, if they're going to do it's Black History Month, they'll open it up and they'll make an announcement, and you can see, and you can search it from home or wherever for free. And then October, which is Family History Month, Family Heritage Month, that's another time where they may do it. Okay, so they'll do it a couple times. But the thing about them, and I know the people, I know the top dog there that works there or whatever, they frustrate the heck out of me, Bill and his crew, because they don't want it, they don't tell us. And so we don't really know until somebody finds it and then notifies the rest of us. But I can plug you into a network where you can it'll increase your chances of finding it. But also, from what I understand, and from the handout, several other ones you're going to see here, you can actually access them from the Archives and Regional History collection there on Western Michigan's campus. But it's great. This is what the screen will look like. When I go, this is what it looks like. In a lot of other places when I go there, this is what it looks like. It's kind of it looks a little deceptive in a way because it's a Black Studies Center. But this is just the interface to get in. And so when I go out to Northern Illinois University where I do my primary research out in DeKalb, I just have to go to newspapers and click on it. And the first time they just had to show me. And then when I clicked on that, then now you can see it's got the Chicago Defender, I think the weekly and something else it says there. What does that say? Oh, the Saturday edition. But it's got two different editions. But that's the Chicago Defender from 1910 to 1975. And that's how I access it through ProQuest. And this is a screen a lot of you will see because you're either going to see one or the other. And this is the one eventually everybody sees. And this is it's just a basic search screen. And you can do advanced searches and whatever. And the key is that you can do keyword searches and you can do something called proximity searches, which are absolutely marvelous. And we'll look at a little example of proximity searches. But again, I get excited because, I mean, it really helps you. It makes you very efficient and effective in researching. And you're going to dig up your people when you use a lot of these tools that are available there, if you know how to use them. Okay. And here's the newspapers. In addition to the Chicago Defender, they've got like, this is the Cadillac and Lexus of newspapers. I mean, they picked the top papers in the history of African American publishing history, pretty much. I mean, they've got the big dogs. I mean, they've got the Defender, they've got the Courier, they've got the New York Amsterdam News, the Atlanta Daily World, Los Angeles Sentinel, Baltimore African American, which I talked about a little bit earlier. You can get that free on Chronicling America website. Norfolk Journal and Guide I absolutely love. If you got people along that, the Carolinas, Georgia, down in Savannah, up a little bit to past DC, maybe even Delaware stuff. The Journal and Guide has lots of social columns, lots of great stuff. The Philadelphia Tribune is a terrific paper, and it's got a long run. It's wonderful. And then the Cleveland Call and Post, they also have, okay? And that's what they have available. Again, you're going to find out at Western Michigan, they have some of these, but not all of them. But there's ways, again, there's other universities. You guys are not that far from Lansing. And Lansing, which is where ProQuest is headquartered, I'm sure that University of Michigan probably has them all. If you can get on campus and use the database, and again, it's hit or miss. But if you're persistent, you'll find a place that has them all. Okay, this is a place. This is a Johnny Come Lately website. When I say Johnny, the last maybe 2-3 years. I keep losing track because time goes so fast. Maybe no more than maybe 4 years in existence. Terrific website. For digitized newspapers called Genealogy Bank. Has the largest collection of black newspapers on the web. Okay, that's the upside. Downside is a subscription database. Okay, which means you have to pay for it. But I'm going to turn it upside again. You can always find deals. They're always offering deals, like you think they're used car salesmen or whatever, because they're always got specials running and stuff, 20% off or whatever. So you look for those discounts, sign up for a year. But it's not very expensive.
We have America's Genealogy Bank here, and I don't know, we'll have to take a look, because I haven't ever been able to search that way, but maybe some of them are available for that. But we do have that one.
Okay, America's Genealogy Bank? Okay.
Part of the same thing, but I don't know which one.
Yeah, you're right, because what they'll do is, they'll modify these things. They'll add little pieces like Ancestry Library Edition, Home Edition, whatever. And so, again, you have to be a detective and see what they have where and compare the two and make your decisions based on that. But I have a subscription to this, and it's very easy on the wallet. It's not bad. I can't remember. I actually jumped into a special again and got a special, and they were so nice that I ended up getting 2 years worth because it was such a good deal, and it was under $100 when they gave me with the 2 years, and so I was really excited. So I did that, and and here's the thing: even if you're not a subscriber, it allows you to do the searches. Okay, So then you can do the searches and then do what? Interlibrary loan, whatever the newspaper is, or find it locally here or whatever. So so it's like your index. You can index using this and then go and the ones that look really good, write down those dates and stuff and then go and find them locally or bring them in locally. Okay? And like I say, it's a great way to zero in on information related to someone's ancestors. And you'll get very adept at reading those little glimpses they give you when they give you that little piece and seeing, okay, that sounds like my people, or yeah, that's it, or whatever. That's my community. And then you just write those down and then go hunting. Okay? This is what it looks like when you go out to Genealogy Bank. This is the top portion of the screen. Here's the bottom portion of the screen, which is where you want to go. You go to the bottom portion of the screen. There's a link right there, a click through for African American newspapers. Then you get this page. And again, there's annual membership. You can get save 20%. I see, I told you. They always have specials going on. But then toward the bottom is where they just give an alphabetical list by state of all their newspapers. And then I clicked on Michigan, and then it showed me that there's 4 Michigan papers currently within their collection. And one of them being the Plain Dealer. And there's just a screen for the Plain Dealer. Again, like it's about 1889 to I want to say 93 is the range they cover. And you can do, like I say, last name searches, but I find my keyword searches are more successful, and you can do them for free. Now here's the Cleveland Gazette, which is also part of Genealogy Bank, and I'm using it for an example here, because I like the keyword search. So this is an example. I'd found a really, really interesting article on a guy by the name of Shackelford, and he was in Sandusky, Ohio. And so I did a search, and my search said Shackelford near 50 Sandusky. What that is a proximity search. And it says, give me all the hits where you find Shackelford within 50 words of Sandusky. Because social columns, I'm thinking social columns, and if there's a Sandusky social column and he's being talked about within 50 words of it, and columns usually I could bump that up. That's just my initial thing. I could bump it out to 70, 100, or whatever. But that's a pretty good range where I'm going to get, if he's in that column, probably 80, 90% of the column, I'm going to get the hit. I go out further, I might get Sandusky and it might be too far away and I might start picking up a lot of other stuff, okay, if you follow my logic. But that's what I did for this one. And when I did it, I got 18 hits between 1907 and 1918, and they were great. Talking about them donating a piano to the church that they belong to, so I found the affiliation of the AME church they belong to. Then I found out why. Well, one of the reasons why they donated the piano or whatever, their daughter was the organist. Their daughter was the one that was playing, or the organ, piano, sorry, interchanging those. But the daughter was the musician that was playing all the time. And so that was more incentive to buy it. They're probably saying, oh, this piece of junk they got our daughter playing on. So they went and bought another one, which was kind of cool. Okay, here's a place called Godfrey Memorial Library. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's really a great, you got to go check it out. They're basically like an online library, genealogy library. Huge, huge. And you can become a Godfrey scholar, which is basically subscribing to them. And go out there and look. They've got lots of stuff out there. And one of the databases they have, and I brought them up for 2 reasons. One of them they have is this one, Accessible Archives, which is also, where is it? This is also out at Western Michigan, the Accessible Archives collection. And I'm only going to briefly go through this really quickly. We only got a couple slides, but I wanted to bring it to your attention because most of what you're going to find here is pre-Civil War black newspapers. There weren't very many, and their focus was different. What are you going to find? They're runaway slaves, which aren't going to give a whole lot of information. You just never know. But they don't tend to give the genealogical information that the post-Civil War papers do because they had a different focus. It was more about abolition and fiery talks and whatever. So you're going to find, again, I mean, if you're tracing your ancestry and they're slaves or whatever, I mean, you're going to use these. But I focus on after the Civil War. That's just the area that I focused the most on. But I wanted to bring this to your attention that there were black newspapers prior to that. And one of the best newspapers in this collection, this is personal opinion, is the Christian Recorder, which is the organ or the paper of the AME Church. And it starts to be prior to the Civil War, and it runs like to 1901 or 1902. I can't even, actually, for time, I'm not going to go into it, but it's a great newspaper. And even if your people weren't AME, you'd want to search it. especially since it's fully searchable and you can just put names and stuff in there. Because they were worshiping with the Baptists. Sometimes the Baptists and the AME would share a church structure. So one of them would have the church in that town, and then they'd let the Baptists come in at a certain time and conduct their services and whatever. And they were brothers and sisters, and so they'd have some interaction. And if somebody died that was a Baptist preacher or whatever, it's going to probably end up here. And plus they have other things, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later, is the information. They put in lots of like information on people looking for people, and they ended up in the recorder. So it didn't matter if you were AME or not. If you were looking for people, you sent it to the Christian Recorder. Some people did. Okay, so now we're going to do some show and tell, looking at some examples of what is out there. Here's Tennessee Home League, organized in Chicago, Illinois. This was in the Nashville Globe newspaper in 1918, and what they're talking about here is a Tennessee group, basically, because as these people moved, especially during the Great Migration time period, they wanted to start dealing with, they were homesick in a sense, and they still had those connections to their homes. And how great is this, that you've got these different Tennessee clubs and things, and right here you can just get, not only do you get that they're from Tennessee, they're actually giving you what people are in Chicago, part of the club, and what different places they were from in Tennessee. Again, when I was talking about earlier, collateral lines, tracking people that you know are related somehow, these people all have a relationship to each other. If Charles Ray dies at some point, you want to try to find the death certificate for him, or try to find him in the newspaper for his death and see your relative probably was there. They might have gave the eulogy or did something or whatever. And so these are great. And this one, it's interesting, they were talking about it organized in Chicago, and then the Chicago paper, they talked about them, the clubs, of course, too, in the meetings. This is something from the Cleveland Gazette, 1904. I love this one. Mrs. Ed Bonner of Kane, Pennsylvania, has returned home with her mother, Mrs. Sarah Johnson. Aunt Sarah was one of the oldest residents of this city, okay? And so what she did is what? You got a migration. Remember how you try? I know that the grandmother was in this one town. You're looking for them, and you didn't know where the daughter was. Well, she's going to die most likely where the daughter was, where she moved her to. And if you didn't know this daughter because of maiden name or whatever, she got married, and you have no idea who she is, this is where the mother would have been buried, and you would have been looking in the other town. But as she got older and older, she moved her. This one, just right at the very top, from Sandusky, 1916, talking about black migration. Well, how do they migrate? How do they get the blacks and stuff? Here's an example of how they got them. In one example, anyway, Mr. Hughes of Nashville, Tennessee, has arrived with 13 men to work in the Farrow Foundry. He will go back for 14 more. Lots of information in there, beyond just the words that you see there, the 15 words or whatever. You now know a place in Sandusky where African Americans were allowed and encouraged to work. That type of stuff, and that's leads for you to try to find where your people were. You see if you can find some records, work records there or something possibly. One of my favorites. 110 years old, he says tobacco helped him for a long life. This guy's from Marysville, Ohio. William Peppers, inmate of the county home here, is one of the oldest living residents in the county. He claims to be 110. Now here, after being sold 3 times as a slave, Peppers related he escaped bondage when a body of Union soldiers marched past the field in which he was plowing for his master. He joined them. He joined those fellow soldiers and came to, I always say this wrong, everybody know from that place, Gallipolis, where he found employment on a farm. Okay, how nice is that? So now you know if that was your ancestor, how he got up there, you know. This is William Prentice. He was a United Mine Workers organizer in the late 1800s, pretty much through most of the 2 decades or 3 decades of the 1900s. And I met a guy at a conference, a National Genealogy Conference, by the name of Isaac Prentice. This was his great-great-granduncle, I believe. And so he was researching the family. I was talking about coal miners, black coal miners. And so he came up to me, he started asking me questions. And he told me about and I'm like, I'm very interested, so I'm gonna do some research. And so I did. This was a picture that he had showed me, but we had found him. I had found the entry for when he died in the United Mine Workers Journal. We found next to nothing in the white newspapers in Birmingham where we knew he had died. And so when the black newspapers, I found out about the ProQuest. I did a search there, come up with nothing. Then when I went down to Birmingham on a visit to IGHR several years ago, the Institute, I went and found the Birmingham Reporter newspaper, black newspaper. Said, okay, I'm going to find him because I knew what his death date was. And boom, what do I find? an absolutely fabulous obituary on his ancestor. And I'm not going to go reading all of this, but the greatest thing is down at the bottom. I'm going to read it for you. Because again, this is stuff where you're going to find it. And some of the stuff in here I found in the other one, but I'd say 50% I didn't find. But then it verified some of the other stuff for you. Remember, you always try to get 2 sources at least to confirm something. And so at the end of this, it says he was buried Sunday in the family lot in Montevallo, Alabama. So now we know that they had a family lot. Quite a few friends from Birmingham attended the funeral in the old frame church house where Will Prentice, some 40 years ago, attended Sunday and day school. His name was found on the Sunday school records 40-odd years past. Now, how great is that to find, to know that he was associated with the Sunday school there. It was an old frame church house and whatever. It was just neat stuff. He was so glad when I found this. Former slaves sue for cotton money. Again, this made me laugh. Again, because we talk about reparations. Reparations, I think it's kind of a new thing. Wasn't too, this is 1917. They're suing for cotton money, just the cotton money. These are cotton slaves, not the tobacco slaves. These guys are saying, hey, we picked all that cotton. We need to be compensated for it. And so they got a lawyer. They're taking it to the Supreme Court and see if they can pay. They want $68 million. They figured that should cover it to the former slaves that picked cotton. And they talk about who organized it, the guy from Muskogee who was fighting for this thing, and they just go a little bit more information about this whole thing. And this is something, again, a court case that'd be interesting to look up and find out how far it went and who got deposed maybe, some other people maybe in there, and find some names of individuals that were involved in this suit. But I love this kind of stuff. Now here's a guy, this is again a good example, Birmingham Reporter, January of 1929. And this is a guy, again, this is a Grand Master Masonic Order of Alabama. His name is Walter Thomas Woods. What's important is, again, what I try to tell you guys and what makes these newspapers so important to you is, again, when you're tracking people, and I've heard it many times, people saying, I get a hit and there's a person, this family, but they're living up in a different place, 4 states away. That can't be my people. I don't know why. They never left whatever. They've always lived in this particular town in Alabama or whatever. I don't know. That can't be the people. Or I'm not sure if those are the people or not. And you kind of ignore it because you're thinking it just doesn't make logical sense. You can't apply 21st century logic to 19th century logic. They moved, did things for different reasons. And here's a great example of that. Okay, so they're talking about this guy. And here it is. He returned a few days ago from Chicago where he went to the bedside of members of his family. On his return, he states that all were greatly improved and that the children will re-enter school. It is remembered that Mrs. Woods and the children have been in Chicago for the past 3 years, particularly for school advantages offered to children. Then they go on, blah, blah, blah. But you see what I'm saying there? You're looking at this, and they were going within 1920, you find them on the census, all of them in Alabama. 1930, you find them in the census, possibly, all in Alabama. But you miss a big part of this. What if a couple of those kids die in Chicago? You're looking for the death certificate. You're looking for the death. I know they're in this courthouse somewhere in Alabama. Why can't I find them? Why can't I find them? And the newspapers will point you to other places to look. And these are some of my favorites. Information wanted. They're all through these newspapers, all through the newspapers. People looking for people. Lots of them, they're looking to link back to slavery, people that were enslaved. And so here's a person, Anna Eliza, daughter of Dolly and Jack Smith, sold from Richmond, Virginia 9 years ago, wants to know the whereabouts of her relatives if they're living. She now lives in Nashville. Her married name is Marbley, and then she gives the AME Church to write. Maria and William Green, looking for him by their son Alfred Green. The late owner he gives the name of the owner, Philemon Holland, the flower inspector at New Bern, North Carolina. So you got the slave owner right there. Any information with regard, send it to Levi Cromwell in Philadelphia. And again, it's great for identifying former slave owners. Woman who knew Abraham Lincoln dies. All of our slaves, I mean, all these people were butting up against the people that are in the history books. And this is just another example of that. This woman was born in St. Mary's County, Maryland. During her early life, she came in contact with Abraham Lincoln while a slave on the George Broome plantation, basically in St. Mary's County, and always talked to the meal she served the president. Man, I wish that was my ancestor, but unfortunately it's not. And so we're going to wrap this up by looking at a couple things. If I whet your appetite, if you're really interested in this, pursuing black newspapers with a little bit more vigor, you might want to go to Afrogenius. If you haven't heard of this website, it's like I said, it's just Afrogenius. I'll let you write that down there. But a year ago, a little over a year ago, I was asked to create a newspaper forum there, a black newspaper forum, which I did. And so a forum is nothing more than you can read people posting and talking about black newspapers, all kinds of information, questions coming up, sources being mentioned as far as where you find ProQuest newspapers and all kinds of things. And so you can go to the forum, it's all completely free. You just go up to the top and you click on forums and then go down to newspapers and select it. And then you just get all kinds of, you can read everything we've done since it started a little over a year ago. All the things I posted and other people posted about black newspapers. You can just go down through the archive and see what strikes your fancy, things that we talked about prior to you joining the list or reading anything off the list. Okay. I'm pulling up one I just did. I made this post on May 1st, and I called it Never Stop Searching. And what it was is I was doing research for here. I'm saying, I'm kind of seeing that area and stuff. So I was doing some research, and I found something very interesting, so I posted it. And I said, believe me when I tell you that black newspapers are wonderful resources. You just never know where the information can be found. And so what I was doing, I was talking about I said, I'm doing some work for the upcoming talk in Michigan. I went into Genealogy Bank. I was putting in the Kalamazoo in the Plain Dealer. And one of the hits that came up said from Michigan towns, but among those 7 Michigan towns was an Ohio town. And it was called Piqua. And I knew a guy I was really good friends with from Ohio that was from Piqua. So I posted this so he would know it and said, hey, I got 90 hits, Piqua news columns. Who would have thunk it? In the Plain Dealer from Detroit, Michigan. And yet somehow there was a migration probably happening between Miami County, Ohio, where he lived, and up into the Kalamazoo area, because in that short little run of papers, 90 hits mentioned in Piqua and what was going on in that community. They were sending that information up to the Plain Dealer. Pretty awesome. Here's a black e-zine that I publish. I'm so far behind, but I am catching up slowly. But this is something you may be interested in. If you go out to my website, and at the very last slide, it'll have my information. But you can go out there to my website, and you can sign up for a free e-zine that talks about black newspapers. And this is what it looks like. And I'll just send you, whenever I do them, you'll be on a list, and I'll just send you stuff that I'm talking about that has to do with black newspapers, little interesting stories or whatever. So if you want to get on that mailing list, just go ahead and go to my website. It's really easy to put your name, it asks for your name and your email, and then it'll put you automatically in the list, and then the next time I send one out, you'll get it. And hopefully it'll be within the month. But yeah, I'm working on a lot of less stuff right now, so I'm trying to get caught up and I'll probably get a couple of them out within the next month or so. And so again, it's just another way to tap into finding out what's going on with black newspapers. And then this is also on my website. I went out right about the time I published my book. I started just going out there and researching. I was so amazed with these social columns and how they're reaching everywhere. I just spent several months in the library out at Northern, just compiling a list of all these different ones I found in dozens and dozens of newspapers, these social columns. So what you're going to see out there is just a list of over 5,000, and it's all organized by state. Yes?
I missed your website address. What is it?
It's going to be on the last slide. Good question. But there's 2 pages of Michigan entries, plus, like I say, almost every other state in the union is represented on that list. And so you get to see all these little towns, again, that never had a black newspaper, but they sent their news to a black newspaper. And you can see if some of the little tiny towns you're looking for are within that 5,000. And then again, at the end of this talk, for anybody interested, I have copies of my book on black newspapers. I'm giving everybody a discount. Like when I go to conferences, I usually knock something off of it. So whenever I go to different signings and stuff like that, I knock something off. So it's normally $12 for the paperback, which most people want because it's pretty inexpensive. It's normally $12, and I'll sell it for $10, and I'll autograph it. And then I have a couple hardbound ones too, but they're more expensive because it's just the nature of it. They cost me a lot more to get them bound. So most people we find the information's the same. It's just that, if you're, for whatever reason, want a hardbound one, but they're much more expensive, like $20. Okay. And so that concludes our presentation. There's my email. Again, if you have any questions about anything, feel free to contact me. People do it all the time. I'll try to point you in the right direction. But if you go to those 2 sites I talked about, again, you connect with me through those too, through the Afrogenius site and through the e-Zine. And then there's my website down there, and you can go to that also. As far as, like I said, that's where you'll find the social columns that I mentioned, in addition to the email sign up. Okay.